March the 2nd. That's the first Sunday in March. So we're going back to the Psalms. And we're at the 62nd Psalm now. And I call this the only Psalm. Now there are 61 Psalms before we get to the 62nd. And then after that, there are 88 Psalms. Well, how can this be the only Psalm? How could that be? Well, the only is in quotation marks. And it's not that that's the only Psalm, but it's the idea of only is emphasized in the 62nd Psalm. Now, it's found 4 times in the King James Version, the English word only. But the Hebrew word that is translated only is found 6 times in that psalm. Now let me show it to you. Let me show you. Here, I've got them highlighted. It's the 62nd psalm. The first word, truly, truly, my soul waiteth upon God, from him cometh my salvation. He only, well, if they were consistent, they could say, he truly is my rock and my salvation. That's one of the ways they could do that. Well, why do they use different words for the same Hebrew word? Why would they do that? Well, the English words have different kinds of emphasis depending on how they're used, don't they? The same is true with Hebrew words. It has a range of meaning, and no one word can always capture the significance of that word in a specific context. Just think, if you're a translator, what a challenge that would be to look at those Hebrew words, looking at the range of meaning of those words, then looking at all the English words that might and try to pick the best English word to capture that. Well, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And there's no one perfect way to do this. This explains a lot of times the reason there's a variation in the translations, because it's hard to do this. And sometimes you do it one way, you're missing something if you do it the other way. But that doesn't mean we got bad translations. We've got good ones, but that's just something translators have to work with. But that word truly is the same word as the word only. He only is my rock and my salvation. Down in verse 4, they only consult to cast him down. That's the only thing they're after. They're just trying to get this guy down. That's what it is. And then it says Selah. Selah. Now watch that in this psalm too. That's a different word, but that's the first part of this psalm. It goes down to Selah. Let's go to part 2. Wait thou only upon God. You see the word only highlighted. Look down at verse 6. He only is my rock and my salvation. And then down at the end of verse 8, Selah. Selah. Okay, that's the second part of this psalm. Now let's go to part 3. Here it is. Surely. That's the word. It's translated only. It's translated truly. And it's translated surely. So that word, translated only, is found 6 times in this psalm. And the third part of this psalm goes all the way down to the end, verse 12. These psalms have structure to them. Sometimes if you understand the structure, see, they're poetical works. And if you understand the structure in that poetry, sometimes it helps them when you're thinking about the psalm to understand the significance of these different parts in this psalm. I'm going to try to explain that as we get through, because this is a very uplifting psalm, and all that just kind of makes it interesting to me. Now, I'm going to start here, though. It's got a superscription. In the King James Version, that's what's written. It'll usually say like Psalm 62, then you got a superscription, and then the psalm. This one says this: to the chief musician, to Jeduthun, Psalm of David. Jeduthun is a person. That's a name. It makes me think Jeduthun must have been the chief musician that David's writing to here. I'm going to write this one to the chief musician, Jeduthun. I'm going to hand that psalm off to him. He'll know what to do with it. That's a psalm of David, so David writes it. We read about Jeduthun. Jeduthun is the chief musician in these three psalms, in the 39th, in the 62nd, and in the 71st. And so you'll find that in the superscription there. We read something about Jeduthun, two different places. Well, there's more than two, but these two mainly. One is when David brings the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. The chronicler in 1 Chronicles 16 tells us about Jeduthun. He says, so he left there before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, Asaph and his brethren to minister before the ark continually, and also the son of Jeduthun. Now, he is to do according to all that's written in the law of the Lord which he commanded. And with Israel, and with them Heman and Jeduthun. Now here's what it says about them, who were expressed by name to give thanks unto the Lord, with trumpets and cymbals for those that should make a sound, and with musical instruments of God. And the sons of Jeduthun were porters. So Jeduthun, he's a musician. I don't know what instrument he played. Did he bang on the cymbals, or did he blow trumpets, or was it some other musical instrument? Whatever it was, Jeduthun, he's the musician that's going to do this. Well, people sometimes say, yeah, they use that to accompany their worship in those days. Not quite. Not quite. I'm going to show you where else we read about this. This is in 1 Chronicles 25, 1 through 6. I don't have it all written out here, but some of it. Look what this says. David and the captains of the host separated to the service the sons of Asaph and of Heman and of Jeduthun, who should prophesy with harps, with psalteries, and with cymbals. It wasn't just part. It wasn't just accompanying the worship. This was part of the worship to use these instruments. There's a little difference there, isn't there? Look now. There were 6. These were the sons of their father Jeduthun, who prophesied with a harp and gave thanks and praise to God. And then it goes on, mentions Jeduthun again down at the end with the cymbals and psalteries and harps for the service of the house of God. These instruments that were used in the Old Testament worship did not just accompany the worship, they were part of the worship. God told them to do this. We read that later. I didn't go pull that up, but it was by the prophets. God instructed them to use it. Why did he do this? These are our worldly people. And they needed worldly things to draw them into that worship of God. God instituted these earthy things, these worldly things, in that Old Testament worship. And that's why they did it. But he didn't do that in the New Testament. You see, in the New Testament worship, it's about more spiritual than Old Testament worship. God expects us to worship with our hearts and to make melody in our hearts and with the Spirit. So he doesn't have the instruments in the New Testament worship. We're to be more mature than that. But in the Old Testament, it was part of their worship. And Jeduthun was one of these that was, he was part of the band, I guess. He's part that would play these instruments. Well, It's a Psalm of David. Let's go to the next thing. Psalm of David. It's interesting to read the Psalms and then go back and read the life of David and try to figure out where does this psalm fit in David's life. Now, we can't always do that for certainty, but here's an instance that would match why David would have written this psalm. It had to do with the time that David was going to go help the Philistines fight against Saul. And the Philistines saw David show up with his men, and they said, wait just a minute, General. You got David over here. We don't trust him. Why, wasn't he the one that killed Goliath, and hadn't he fought with Philistines? And now you're going to use him as we fight again? He might turn on us in the battle. And the king said, okay, David, you got to go home. You can't fight with us today. So 1 Samuel 30 in verse 1, it came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day. See, they'd left Ziklag to go help fight against Saul. So you can't do it. So 3 days later, they come back home to Ziklag, and look what happens. Look what happens. The Amalekites had invaded in the south, and Ziklag had smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken the women captives that were therein, and slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. Verse 4, then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept till they had no more power of the weak. They came back home, and the Amalekites had come in and raided things and took everything off and took away their women and children, and their camp was in ruins and their families were gone. And they wept till they couldn't weep anymore. But then look at verse 6. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him. That's David's own men. Because the souls of all the people were grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. I want you to look what happened to David. Saul was against him. The Philistines were against him. The Amalekites were against him. Carried his family away, and his own men want to stone him. And I'm reminded of that song. Living below in this old sinful world, where could I go but to the Lord? Everyone had turned on David, but the Lord hadn't. And David knew where he could receive strength. He's alone now, but he's alone with God. And he encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Now that matches what we're going to read in this psalm. By the way, the story works out. David and his men did go and they recovered it all. They recovered it. So I'll tell you how the story ends. But let's go to this psalm now while David's all alone. It's been suggested that this psalm could be called God is Man's Only Hope. Remember the 3 parts? Part 1, verses 1 through 4. God is our only hope for defense against our enemies. Verses 5 through 8, God is our only hope for refuge. And then verses 9 through 12, God is our only reliable help. Well, God is our only hope for defense against our enemies. Let's start, verse 1. Truly, my soul waiteth upon God. From him cometh my salvation. I tell you, when you're distressed, it's hard to wait, isn't it? We get so urgent. It's like a little thing my father said one time. Said in a prayer, said, Lord, give me patience and hurry. We don't want to wait. But David knew it's God's timing. And I don't understand it. But I can wait on God. In his own timing, he'll come through. Truly my soul waiteth upon God. From him cometh my salvation. And then he says this. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. I tell you, you stand on that rock, to move you, they're going to have to move that rock. That's going to be hard to do. David knew where to stand. He knew where his salvation lay. He knew who could defend him. And he could trust his God. Verse 3, how long? Well, that kind of goes back to this waiting, doesn't it? How long? Sometime when we're waiting, it seems so long. How long will you imagine mischief against a man? Ye shall be slain, all of you. As a bowing wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence. I want you to think of that wall just tottering, the fence tottering, about to fall down. Compare that to that solid rock where David stands. Those Amalekites, they're not going to get away with this. It says, they only consult to cast him down from his excellency. They delight in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Selah. That ends that first part of the psalm. That Selah, it's thought to be some kind of musical notation. Maybe they're going to retune the strings or play in a different key or something, but that's kind of like the end of the first verse now. Selah. Let's go to part 2. God is our only hope for refuge. My soul, wait thou only upon God. David's still waiting. Waiting. For my expectation is from him. When we're talking about hope in the Bible, we're talking about expectation. We talk about hope commonly that we don't know how things will come out. Well, I hope it comes out all right, and you don't know if it's going to be all right or not. But a Bible hope, you say, I hope it comes out all right, it means I expect it to. That's what Bible hope is. It's a desire, yes, but with an expectation that it's going to happen. Our hope. See, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's because we have faith in what God has done. That confidence we have that we call faith is the confidence in what God said he will do. He promised. And when you have a promise from God, you have an expectation from God. So he says, my expectation is from him. Now verse 6. Look at verse 6. I'm going to go back. You see verse 2? He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. Let's go to verse 6. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. Does it sound like David's faith may be growing? I'll not be greatly moved. And I'm not going to be moved at all. The only difference there is the word greatly is dropped now. I'm not going to be moved because I have an expectation due to the promise of God. It says, God is my salvation and my glory. What do we glory in? We glory in our strength. We glory in our friends. We glory in our wealth. My glory is in God, the rock, my strength, and my refuge. Trust in him at all times. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us, Selah. Pour out your heart. We can pour our hearts out to God. Sometimes we don't know who to talk to or what, but we know this. God knows us all the way through to our hearts. You will not surprise God when you pour your heart out to him. And you can let him know everything. You can express it all to God. It'll clarify it for yourself if you do that. And so pour your heart out to God. And he's promised his children, he's going to hear. He's going to hear. Let's go to part 3. God is our only reliable help. Now, we look like we get help from other places, but we can only really rely on God's help. Surely men of low degree are vanity. Low degree. We know that. They're kind of empty. They're not going to help you much. But men of high degree are a lie. To be laid in the balance, they're altogether lighter than vanity. You know, you can only trust men so much, and men will fail you. Vanity and lies, and it doesn't matter high degree or low degree. They can just fail you and not show up when you need them. It's better to put trust in the Lord, Psalm 118, 8 and 9. Better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in men. It's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. I think now's where I was going to tell that story about J.D. Tent, that old Texas preacher. He wanted to do mission work in Indian Territory. That's now Oklahoma. He ran around, a bunch of men said, yeah, you do that. We'll take care of things for you. You come back and we'll have collection for you, and we'll make sure you're able to have enough money to get you through the rest of the year. Go do that work. And he went out and did that work in the Indian Territory of Oklahoma, came back, and the men hadn't done what they said they'd do. They didn't have anything for him. And he was disgusted. And in his own style, he said, here I was. I thought I was trusting the Lord, and I was just trusting a bunch of stingy brethren. He said, it made me think about giving up preaching and doing respectable work. Well, men can fail you, but God will not. Trust not in oppression. You think men are going to help you? What if I can just make everybody do what I want them to do and oppress them? That's not going to work. Become not vain in robbery. Listen, robbery is not the way out. Don't go breaking the law and start stealing things to get out. That's not going to do it. And what if you have riches? He says, if riches increase, set not your heart on them. I'm reminded of 1 Timothy 6:17. Charge them that are rich in this world that they be not handed nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God which giveth us richly all things to enjoy. Here's 3 things that God has that you need that he can deliver. One is he has the power. Second, he is a merciful God. Also unto thee, O Lord, belongeth mercy. And third, he's just. Thou renderest to every man according to his work. So we can trust the Lord. And that's what we need to learn to do. David was all alone at this time, his own men wanting to heal him, but he knew he could turn to the Lord. Now we can know that too. And that's the lesson for us in this psalm. Only God is that hope. Only God is the one that can save us. Jesus said, no man cometh unto the Father but by me, only through Jesus. And we come to that salvation. If you need to be baptized into Christ this morning, when you're doing that, you're putting your trust in what the Lord has said and what he has promised. So you're invited to let us know you want to do that as we sing the invitation song.